Wow, does that look seriously fun or what? I've been so looking forward to this conversation. Very honored here to be joined by Jim Denny, who's the VP of Digital Experience at Six Flags, and Daryl Powers, who's the VP of Marketing, as well as Christine Rue with Merkle. So let's just dive right in. So Jim, Six Flags operates about 42 parks across North America. So millions of guests every year. Take us back 2 to 3 years. You and Daryl were at Cedar Fair, and you had this vision of transforming the customer experience through data. What was the catalyst moment that made you say, we need to fundamentally change how we approach customer data?
Yeah, I would say 3 years ago is pretty accurate about when we sort of started on this treasure data sort of journey. And I know we'll talk more about the journey, but I think it really goes back a little bit farther. I think it's good context to know that Daryl and I have worked together for 20 years, 12 years at Cedar Fair Six Flags, 8 years in financial services. And we have built a relationship over that time. But I think, I would go back from my perspective. I think it'll be interesting to hear Daryl's too. But 10 years ago, I was walking around the halls of Cedar Fair with a deck, and the deck really had 3 themes to it. Themes that I think we've all heard in sessions here this year, last year. The first one being, our guests were never looking at just us or our competitors to determine what the experience should be, right? They were looking across all of their interactions with all kinds of companies, right? So Amazon and Uber and Chick-fil-A and all these different experiences. And so that was kind of the first theme was, hey, we got to live up to more expectations than we're thinking about. And then I think, after that, the theme really became, okay, what did those companies do right? And what we came back to was, what they did was they removed all of the friction. And so our second theme was, how do we deliver frictionless fun? And so we really rallied around frictionless fun. And the way we thought we could get there, we had a whole digital ecosystem that we drew up, but at the center of that, just like on a million slides we've all seen the last couple of days, was unified customer profile. And I think, what we thought at the time was, well, we've got a CRM, we've got other internal systems that hold all of our guest entitlements, their season passes, their tickets, their dining plans, drink plans, fast lanes, all that stuff. So with those, we ought to be able to make this work, right? That seemed pretty simple, and we thought that was the way we were going. I think really what happened was we made some valiant efforts, we made some great strides, and then we found out there's a missing piece, and I think that's when the light bulb came on and said, we need a customer data platform.
Okay, and you just had this vision come together, and then you threw a merger into this as well, too. How'd that work?
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, you throw things like a merger into any mix, and I think it's important to realize, we had started a whole digital audit of, what's the experience like, brought in the consultants, did all that, and at first, back in January of 22, SeaWorld came around, right? Mm-hmm. And so SeaWorld was going to buy Cedar Fair. That threw a wrench in it. And then we ended up coming back to it, starting to build on things. And to your point, right as we were releasing a new Cedar Fair app built on a profile, out came the announcement that Six Flags was coming. So sure, it's gotten a lot more complex. And there's a lot of things, a lot of layers that have been added to the mix with the merger, for sure.
Pretty incredible scale. Okay, well, before we get to the solution, Christine, I'd love your help in understanding what was the situation that you guys were going into from Merkle's perspective, longtime partner. What did the landscape inside Cedar and Six Flags look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, you have to think about who you're designing for, right? And so I'm partial. I think these are the 2 cutest guests that have been in the Six Flags park this whole year, my kids, Ellie and Gideon. And so you have to think about who you're designing for, right? And so technically, we were going into this with CDP first. Daryl and Jim, as Jim was explaining, they have really great strategy, really great perspective, and knew what they wanted to do to continue to evolve their solution. And so throwing the merger into that obviously added more complexity when it came to organizational structure, strategic perspective. How are we going to communicate to both sets of customers. Legacy Cedar Fair customers had been communicated with in a certain way for the past decade that we had been working together with managing their customer data warehouse. But now you throw Six Flags into the mix, and their customers, we have to figure out, are we going to be leveraging the same strategies? And then organizationally, you are bringing together the tech stacks of $1 billion plus companies. So you're not just having to figure out, technically, okay, we want to go ahead and do a CDP, but now how do we reconcile these two tech stacks? And what this looks like is, this is what we're working with.
I love a good tech stack like this. This is
Scott is partial to logos in the MarTech space. But we really had to approach this from a perspective of, okay, this is no longer a CDP. This is a multifaceted project. And so looking at that, we wanted to make sure that we weren't making this future-proofed, but future-ready. So how can we design this in a way that's going to allow us to constantly evolve and create value realization at every step of the way as we're evolving the solution? And so we did that in two ways. We first started with a technology strategy assessment, which allowed us to go in and identify this lovely map of everything that was in play at both companies and figuring out what needs to stay, what needs to go, what do we need to source net new. And then this was also followed up shortly thereafter with a data strategy assessment, which then allowed us to take a look at, okay, we have disparate data from both systems coming in from all of these systems. How are we going to bring that together to make it functional and useful that's going to help drive us toward our business objectives for this new unified company? And so it's been a process and trying to look at things from assessing everything from a value and effort perspective. So what's the value that we're going to drive by doing each of these projects, and what's the effort required? Obviously, implementing a CDP is high value, high effort, but very much worth it. And so that was something that was very immediate on the roadmap, and just also acknowledging that we couldn't boil the ocean, but where's the best place for us to start that's going to drive immediate impact?
Daryl, you mentioned something really interesting in our prep, that Six Flags touches so many different business models, right? You've got subscriptions like a HelloFresh, you've got destination experiences like hotels, foot traffic like retail, even QSR elements. How does that complexity fit into your data strategy?
Yeah, the data strategy is even more complex than that. So we sell admission products through online ticketing, which is through a third party. We sell admission to a day ticket consumer, a season pass holder, an ongoing membership strategy, which is on the legacy Six side. We have hotel properties. We sell through third-party resellers. We have group business, so people come to the parks on groups. So it's a one-to-many relationship, understanding the household, understanding the guest composition. People who come into the parks may not even be the ones that transacted with us. So how do you unify all this data, right? They connect to the Wi-Fi, they download Jim's mobile app, they register that. How are we making some deterministic, some probabilistic matches to understand this guest composition, which informs not only our media strategy and how we go to market, but also how do we activate these guests? Because it's great if we sell a bunch of passes and a bunch of tickets, and it's great if we have the ongoing membership piece of this, but if no one's coming to the park and using the facilities, riding the coasters, enjoying our food and beverage, our entertainment, and our drink plans, we're not making the other side of the money, right? If you go back to where these parks are driving their EBITDA, you've got to look at the activation. So how do you initiate and engage on the sale, the conversion, get the site traffic, but also then unify that data to get them into the park, get them in more often, and even stair-step them into new products. So you take that day-to-get consumer, if they fit within the parameters of what a pass holder might be, which is a distance range to the parks, migrate them into silver, migrate them into gold, and keep them for generational, as those children grow up through the years. You saw Christine's kids, from that perspective, they would be in our consideration until they get to the dropout age of 13, 14, where something happens and they go do other things for the summer. And then they come back with a different composition of humans that in their teen years. So generation after generation is what our parks, our local regional amusement business is doing. And how do we tap into that from a data perspective?
So let's talk a little bit about how you got to where you are. This clearly wasn't a quick decision. Would love to have you walk us through a bit like the early RFP process. What were the things that made it challenging, and I'm curious, not to stir things up, but Daryl, you had mentioned that you and Jim actually disagreed for quite some time on the right approach.
We disagreed on a couple of things. So again, having worked together for 20 years, more of like a married couple than we are business partners. But you know, when someone comes to you and says, hey, you've been doing CRM this way and it's been successful for 10 years, you're sort of like, why do I want to, you know, I'm old enough to say I don't want to take on any new projects or want to do anything differently and disrupt my own, you know, daily life in the company. But Jim came to me and said we should start looking at CDPs. And once I came across on that bridge, we then did initiate the RFP process. We had a variety of players out there. And we did anything that any good marketer, any good digital experience manager would do. We turned to some insight from some experts. And so we called Forrester and talked to Joe Stanhope to get a list of the players that we should be considering for the RFP process. And then we started down the path with procurement. I'll leave that one to you to take over the procurement process if you like.
Yeah, you would. So, thanks, honey.
I love you.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think the procurement process, we'll just leave it at that. It was what it was, but we did go through the process with Joe talking through, hey, what do we want? I think what Forrester did really well for us was really, you know, it's interesting when I go back to the first time I walked into Daryl's office and said, hey, I think we want to look at customer data platforms, and he said, why? And that was about it. I said, well, you know, I put up a whole defense around this is why I think we should do it. And he said, yeah, I don't think so. And so when we got back together and said, okay, how do we do this? And we talked with Joe. Joe sort of laid it out in terms of, hey, you know, you're probably better off that you didn't do this years ago. He said at the time, I think people were way ahead of the curve. And, you know, so now is probably the time to be looking at this. And so it wasn't Daryl who was wrong, actually. It was Daryl's wisdom. He could see into the future, and he knew that Joe was going to tell us that. But Joe broke it down into different types of CDPs. And it broke it down into data ingestion over here, activation and orchestration over here. And we talked through what was important to us. And as the partners that potential partners that we brought in, we did the evaluation, and it was a tough call. It came down to the wire for us.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we talk about disagreeing, so once we got into the RFP process, we hired Merkle with our top 4 to do an unbiased review for us. Right? They had been a strategic thought partner of ours for the past 10 seasons. That's where we household the Cedar data and the CRM ecosystem. And they did just that, right? We did all the demos, we did all of the looky-loos. And we had some favorites, right? And our favorites weren't necessarily lined up. And one of the horses in the lead for me turned out not to be in the lead by the time we got done with this. We then went into a POC with the 2 final contenders. And for me, it really came down more to the data orchestration, less on the UI. And one of the things that we kept asking ourselves, Jim and I, was, and we asked this of the partners too, who are the humans that we need to manage this? Who are the humans on your team that you need? Because in a traditional marketing model where you have folks in IT or folks in data who are just running basic SQL queries and you're doing that batch and push, et cetera, this is a very different paradigm from the humans we have working at the new Six Flags.
Wow. Okay, Joe is my hero, and I think we've got a session coming up right after this that might involve some hot wings or something? All right, that would be really fun. Let's get a bit technical for a moment. Christine, you're in the middle of like this massive data migration, bringing 2 legacy SQL databases together, moving to Snowflake, creating what you call a consumption layer, and then Treasure Data sits on top of that. For folks thinking about their own CDP implementations, can you walk us through why this architecture made sense?
Yeah, so as we talked, we went through and did an assessment to see what technologies existed. And of course, from there, you want to figure out what does your future state, your desired future state look like. And so I know it's a lot, but this is where we ended up. And so the key components here, we've heard a lot this week about the importance of having a solid data foundation to everything. And so we're helping with multiple projects. We're working on CDP. We're doing this Snowflake migration. We are trying to help maintain business as usual, right? But the best way I can think to compare the consumption layer concept is with how a restaurant operates. So if you've ever worked in a restaurant, if you've ever seen a kitchen in a restaurant on a busy Saturday night dinner shift, you know that it is firing on all cylinders and efficiency is the name of the game. So what you see here at the bottom is that we created this lake house within Snowflake that is our data lake. It's where everything from the enterprise, the goal is that everything from the enterprise is going to be feeding into there. So we will have absolutely everything. That's the pantry of our restaurant. It has every ingredient we need. It's all right there for us. We can grab it and use it anytime. However, if I'm trying to go ahead and get a salad out the window to a table, I probably shouldn't be in the back making the dressing from scratch while I'm trying to get a table out and they're sitting waiting for their food. I'm gonna prep that in the morning, right? And I'm gonna put all this food that's been prepped, sliced, diced, aggregated, put together. It's all gonna be on the line, ready for assembly and ready to get out the window in an efficient manner. And so that's really what our consumption layer is. The consumption layer is helping us get all that data ready for easy utilization within the Treasure Data ecosystem. So that's been, I think, really crucial to making sure that we have the right foundation and that we're approaching this in the right way to, again, make sure that we are future ready and that we're setting this up for success, not just for CDP, but for AI and everything else that they may want to do in the next 5-10 years.
I love that metaphor, by the way, particularly as I start to think about lunch. All right, so you've got this foundation that you've built. Let's talk about what you're actually doing with it. Jim, maybe take us through a specific example. Like you had mentioned in our prep this idea of a memorable exit where, say, someone's favorite ride is down in the morning, and you want to turn that around before they leave. How does that actually work with your new capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a balance, I think, that we've been, working through. I mentioned at the top the sort of idea of frictionless fun, and I think maybe going back to what that doesn't mean for us, I think that the idea of us building an app or a website, for that matter, or any functionality, whether it's mobile food ordering or the status of the rides, what we don't want is to create an app that's a better experience than the park itself, right? The park is the hero. The park is the star of the show. I mean, you saw those clips. That's the fun, right? It's not about coming to the park and burying your nose in this mobile app that tells you everything you have to do next. So what we want to do is make it less invasive, less controlling in your experience. But to your point, the app is there to collect your favorite rides, understand what's going on inside the park. What are the wait times? When can we notify you that, hey, that ride that was down earlier today now only has a 10-minute wait, and you like this ride? What about the show that you can't go on the ride, but this show's coming up? So how can we leverage those sorts of things to make your day better? And on your way out, I mean, we have to talk to you differently, right? When a day ticket person is leaving the park, we might want to say, hey, here's a nice price on a return ticket to come back. Or we might say to a season pass holder, hey, don't miss the big event that we've got going on next week, right? And so it's making sure that we understand who you are when you come in and when you leave, that we can give you the right information at the right time. Again, here I am full of all these themes that we've heard multiple times this week, right?
All right. Well, I'm very proud that we've made it this far through the discussion without AI coming up once. Allow me to disrupt that. So you're in a beta with Treasure Data's new AI-powered email creation tool. And what caught my attention is, you're managing over 40 different park brands, and each kind of need their own identity and creative. How do you see AI changing the game for that?
Yeah, we're a national brand now with the Six Flags branding that we kept from the merger. Plus, we're a house of brands under that house, right? So every Six Flags parks has its own unique identity, its own persona, as well as the legacy Cedar Fair parks. The look and the feel of Six Flags Fiesta should be very different than Six Flags Over Georgia versus Magic Mountain versus especially Knott's Berry Farm and Cedar Point. So just to name some of our top properties. So AI, I think, we talked about Binder. We talked about some of the stuff that Kaz was showing the other day about reaching into Binder and being able to create creative. I think from an email perspective, how do you manage that look and feel? Because while we're very localized in our markets, our guests know our ride harnesses. They know the color of that coaster. They know when we're bullshitting and saying this is a unified ad for your park, when in reality it's been shot at one central location. So, they're very in tune with our look and our feel. I think the AI components will allow us to customize and personalize, at least on the ride side. We'll grow into the data side over time, but it'll allow us to manage the complexity of that 40 different brands, plus the hotels, plus the campgrounds, plus the safari in New Jersey, that we all have to support. Right, it's a lot with very few, capital on the team itself. We have very small teams running this stuff.
So Christine, as a follow-up for that, one of the things we had discussed was, how this sort of changes the nature of entry-level work around marketing as well, too. How are you thinking about that as a strategic challenge?
Yeah. So funny enough, last year, Daryl, Jim, and I were here at CDP World, and we came out of one of the sessions where AI was fleetingly discussed. It was not as prominent of a topic as it is this year. But we came out of one of the sessions, and I couldn't help but wonder, when you're thinking about how all of us started in our careers, we all started in an entry-level role where we were getting the hang of things, understanding how things work, and a lot of the types of tasks that we were doing in those entry-level jobs that set the foundation for our knowledge base that we have now. Those are the types of tasks and responsibilities that AI is going to be able to more easily absorb. So how do you set that foundation of knowledge for your incoming employees to make sure that they're understanding functionally how to think about the work that they're doing and not rely solely on AI? I do think one thing that is a bit of a differentiator is thinking about kids who are growing up now in a world of AI. My kids are never going to know a world without AI. So they are going to grow up and learn how to discern what AI is spitting out to them. They are going to know how to prompt intelligently. So I think that as we're sort of transitioning and bridging between the generation, everybody in this room here, where AI is up and coming right now in the moment, versus the next generation where it's coming up and how they are growing and developing, and it's just a native part of their life. I think that that's going to be a very interesting dynamic, and it'll be, understanding still how AI is going about things and what it's actually driving underneath the surface is still really important foundationally. So I think it's good not to lose track of that as we work with our teams and into the AI future.
All right. So Daryl and Jim, you called this a 5-year journey, and you're starting year 2. So I guess I maybe have a 2-part question here. What is one thing you'd wish you'd known at the beginning, now that you're over a year into this? And what are you most excited about for the next 3 years ahead?
Well, the integration, that's a very loaded question, Scott. I mean, the integration of the two companies has been much more challenging than I think anyone would have expected. Their data structure, how they handled data, I thought they were well ahead of us with CRM. They were not on the Six Flags portfolio. So we were able to stand up treasure data within 3 months because of we had nothing but raw aggregate data to leverage on the Six Flags side. So that was sort of our first milestone. I think we were challenged too, that if we got stood up in 3 months, we actually would be on this stage. So had I known that, I might have slowed that roll a little bit. So I think that's my sort of looking backwards. But looking forwards, we're about to move the Cedar Fair side of the portfolio into treasure data and decouple from our current campaign management tool and so forth. So I think for the contemporization of our MarTech stack is what I'm most looking forward to, right? I mean, we are at the cusp of defining a new era for the new Six Flags, whatever that looks like. We now have the tools in place between new websites, new mobile app, new tech stack, new CDP that allows us to kind of engage with our guests in a never-before way on both sides of the portfolio. So that's kind of what I'm embracing for the next 3 years. And maybe we should renegotiate that deal that was put out there. So.
I don't know who put 5 years out there. No. So I think, as we look at it, much like Daryl described the data, I think when we looked at the digital experience side from both sides, on the legacy Cedar side, we definitely built the mobile app around the profile, about making sure that your entitlements were there when you logged in, that it was magic, right? And the other side of the house was looking more at technologies that were driving that. And there is not a right answer. I'm not saying there's a right answer. We got it right, they got it wrong. That's not, it's just two different paths that we were following along the way. And I think, as we merged, we said, well, we're here on this journey with our data and what we're trying to do, so let's take it down the profile path and build out a new site, build out a new app, and bring those things together. Spoiler alert, coming soon. And so we'll see that out there. And I think that to me was, kind of the differences. And I wish I had known a merger was coming. That would have been the good thing to know. But at the end of the day, looking forward, I agree 100% with Daryl. It's the modernization of all of the things. We have capabilities now built into the MarTech stack that we had never had before. And I think that's going to enable incredible journeys for our guests, great things for our associates. I see CDP not just being a win for our guests and all the personalization that we can do, making their lives easier, but I think the associate on the other side of that, those guest services people who have to help people, when somebody walks up and they can know what they need to know in the moment, that is going to be a beautiful thing. So I look forward to bringing those two worlds together into one, and I think it's just going to deliver an experience like we've never thought about before. So I'm excited.
That is pretty awesome. And coming from the tech industry, I have no idea what you guys mean about like these unexpected challenges of mergers. What could they mean?
Well, we were in financial services. If there was a merger, we just knew it was Tuesday, right? So we've seen some differences in mergers.
All right. Well, as we come to our close here, I figure maybe one final question for each of you, which is, what is one piece of advice you'd give to someone in this audience who's either starting their CDP journey or maybe is stuck somewhere in the middle of it? What would you say to them?
Keep an open mind. I mean, I think that's the hardest part, is that we all go in this with, there was the slide earlier about having a hammer and everything becomes a nail, right? I think we all go in with our own definition of what this is going to do for us. But you start to open up your mind and you hear what everybody else sees and you say, oh, that could do that. That's right. I didn't think about that. Just being here today, and I know we're beating up on AI being such a topic, but there are a lot of things that I've heard this week that I thought, you know what, I didn't think about that before. So I do think that there's a lot to learn by keeping an open mind.
My advice would be to enlist the help of a strategic partner like Merkle. You don't need to go it alone. I don't think you want to go it alone. And the only other advice I have, having managed this so far this year, is if you can keep your internal IT out of it, keep them out of it, because they do not understand the upstream and downstream uses of customer data that the marketing team, that your web team, that your e-commerce team is going to leverage this stuff for. At least that's how it is in our case. And so that becomes a bottleneck and a road, really a roadblock when you're looking for resources to get this executed, which is why you have to outsource the implementation.
So two quick ones. So the first is having a really engaged leadership team. We would not have been able to do the things that we did if it wasn't for Jim and Daryl being so actively involved, advocating, pushing forward, selling the vision internally, and helping to get their teams aligned to move things as efficiently and effectively as they have. When it comes to CDP, though, for everybody else, I would say the biggest thing to think about is having a very thoughtfully designed data foundation. When it comes to CDP, it's going to be only as powerful as the data that you're putting into it. Same with AI. So make sure that you get that data foundation right. And finally, remember who you're designing for, right? Remember why you're doing this in the first place, and that can help guide a lot of your decisions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Please, a round of applause for Jim, Daryl, Christine. Thanks for taking us on the roller coaster. All right.